Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming here today. My name is Daniel Noroña. I am the America's Advocacy Director here in Amnesty International USA. It is a pleasure for Amnesty to host this event titled "The Threat to Human Rights in the Face of the Regionalization of the Bukele's Model of Government." Thank you. In this sense, we are gathered here today with a couple of experts from international organizations based here in Washington, D.C. We have from the Washington Office of Latin America, Ana María Méndez, their Central America Program Director. From the Latin America Working Group, we have Vicki Gass, their Executive Director. And joining us soon is Leonor Artaga from the Due Process of Law Foundation. The program is going to be divided in two parts. Right now, we're going to see a documentary that was produced by Amnesty on the situation on El Salvador in regards to the report. You can find different QR codes where you can download the report. And then we're going to go into the conversation with our colleagues. So if you allow me, we're going to begin first with the presentation of this video, and then we will dive into the conversation.
Cuando yo estaba ahí en la Bartolina, me llegaron a sacar y me dijo un policía, te vas a pudrir en la cárcel. Y yo le dije, ¿por qué me dice eso? Yo no le debo nada a la justicia. Y me dijo, no, si es que a nosotros porque se nos ha dado la gana de traerte. Y así que vas a quedar detenida, me dijo, por agrupaciones ilícitas, me dijo. Oye, quedar detenida por el régimen, me dijo, para pudrirte, me dijo, en la cárcel. Yo estaba en mi casa recientemente, pues a mí me operaron. Estaba en proceso de recuperación, que me habían operado. Pues el 11 de octubre llegaron a mi casa unos agentes de la policía con varios carros, bastantes policías llegaron y preguntaron que quién era el dueño del carro. Mi papá lo había puesto a mi nombre porque como yo me encargaba con mi mamá de salir a hacer las compras, entonces mi papá me dijo, mejor a tu nombre para que no tengas ningún problema al momento de presentar tarjetas o de todo. Y bueno, yo dije, les dije yo, dame todos tus documentos, se los entregué, les entregué mi DUI, les entregué la tarjeta del carro. Entonces y me dijeron, no andaban ningún papel, nada, y solo me dijeron, vaya, nos vas a acompañar.
El régimen de excepción, en un primer momento, o en la narrativa también oficial, es para combatir a las pandillas. Pero en la realidad, aunque sí ha habido algo de eso, de combatir a las pandillas, también ha existido la utilización del régimen para intimidar a los líderes sociales y periodistas.
Cuando Bukele era alcalde de San Salvador y él ya tenía la idea de convertirse en presidente de El Salvador, cuando hablaba de la inseguridad en El Salvador, hablaba en contra de los planes de mano dura, decía, nunca han funcionado, no han funcionado aquí y no han funcionado en ninguna parte, porque vamos a seguir haciendo lo mismo, y hablaba de educación y hablaba de darle alternativas a los jóvenes y tal, hablaba de dotar mejor a la policía con armas y eso, pero su principal enfoque no era de mano dura, digamos. Pero cuando llegó al gobierno, sí, cambió totalmente su discurso a uno de mano dura.
No han visto a la Fuerza Armada que van a enfrentar de ahora en adelante. He observado a lo largo de este régimen de excepción procesos penales marcadamente arbitrarios. He observado procesos penales en donde no se cumplen las garantías mínimas orgánicas de independencia o de imparcialidad, y en donde se dan otras vulneraciones todavía más graves a los derechos y garantías del debido proceso que regulan la Constitución de El Salvador y múltiples tratados internacionales.
A mí me metieron a la celda de castigo, a la celda más rebelde le llaman ellos ahí. Me metieron ahí, a las nuevas, a todas las iban metiendo ahí. Bueno, cuando yo voy entrando, voy viendo que en la celda habían 250 mujeres y para dormir en 20 catras. Tenía que dormir una mujer encima de otra, todo oscuro, como que era un calabozo. Y pues ahí empezó todo, maltratos, torturas. Llegaban los policías, los de los embotines, llegaban y a echar gas pimienta, a decirle ultrajarlo a uno, la comida que uno comía ahí pues en mal estado, ya arruinada. De hecho, en mi comida siempre no había días, era de todos los días, desayuno, almuerzo, cena. Si no iba una cuca, una mosca o pelos en la comida. Era de todo el tiempo así.
Lo que se ha comunicado por parte de las distintas instancias es que hay una mayor percepción de seguridad, pero eso no necesariamente se ve reflejado en las experiencias concretas de la ciudadanía. Siguen habiendo muchas personas desaparecidas, sobre todo personas jóvenes, niños, niñas. Sigue habiendo muchos casos de violencia sexual. Hay mucho temor, ¿verdad?, en las juventudes, en la niñez, en las mujeres sobre todo, por la presencia de los cuerpos uniformados en los territorios, en las comunidades. Esto nos preocupa. No es un secreto, ni ha empezado hoy. Históricamente, los cuerpos uniformados en El Salvador tienen una historia de violencia sexual sobre todo, de violencia feminicida, ¿verdad?, contra mujeres, contra niñas, contra niños, contra personas LGTBI.
En El Salvador se están violando derechos humanos de forma sistemática. En El Salvador no hay transparencia, no se sabe qué se está haciendo con los fondos públicos. Y obviamente me dicen, pero la gente está contenta, la gente está aplaudiendo todo esto. Entonces se les dice, sí, pero lo que pasa es que la gente aplaude y está conforme con todo porque no tiene información, porque no sabe lo que está haciendo el gobierno en realidad, tras bambalinas.
Valdría la pena recordar las palabras de Monseñor Romero, ¿verdad? La serpiente, ¿verdad?, de la justicia pareciera que solo muerde a quien va descalzo, y eso se sigue sucediendo.
Ahora con el régimen de excepción es casi que una especie de nueva herramienta que están utilizando, sobre todo los cuerpos de seguridad, Fuerza Armada, la Policía Nacional Civil, incluso la Fiscalía, para intimidar a los líderes sociales. Eso ha implicado que incluso algunas marchas han tenido que disolverse o ni siquiera se han terminado de coordinar porque tienen mucho temor de salir a la calle y que sean arrestados bajo el régimen de excepción y pasar más de 2 años sin ningún juicio justo o sin seguir el debido proceso bajo otros delitos que no tienen nada que ver con la actividad que ellos están realizando de la protesta.
He observado detenciones masivas, detenciones indiscriminadas, detenciones en base al mantenimiento de cuotas de capturas diarias o de capturas mensuales que se tienen que cumplir a como dé lugar, independientemente de que las personas detenidas sean o no sean personas culpables o pertenezcan o no pertenezcan a grupos delincuenciales.
Porque han reconocido públicamente que hay detenciones que no debieron ocurrir. Eso son palabras, ¿verdad?, del ministro de Justicia, que al menos 7,000 personas han sido liberadas porque se ha reconocido que fueron detenidas de manera innecesaria o injusta, arbitraria, pero no se queda con reconocer y liberarle, ¿verdad? Además de la libertad, hay que resarcir este daño.
En el caso de las familias que se exponen y que denuncian la detención arbitraria de un hijo, de un hermano, de una pareja, etcétera, hemos documentado casos de que estas personas han sido detenidas posteriormente, acusándolas también de ser miembros de las pandillas.
Llegó un momento de que nos llegaron a sacar a todas y nos dijeron de que teníamos que desnudarnos porque iban a ver si uno tenía tatuajes. Quienes estaban ahí no eran mujeres, eran hombres. Uno tenía que salir completamente desnudo. Creo que eso es algo de lo que también en mi vida no se va a borrar. Y eso mismo también lo pasé en la Bartolina, cuando me llevaron a hacerme como un peritaje. Había un montón de hombres, de detectives, y hicieron que yo me quitara toda la ropa. Y era así una rueda de hombres, y yo estaba en medio. Me hicieron que yo me vistiera y me quitara toda la ropa. Hasta que llegó una mujer y dijo que por qué me tenían así. Yo sentí en ese momento que me iban a hacer algo.
El régimen ha capturado muchos líderes sociales, sindicales, han capturado periodistas por informar la verdad. Entonces nosotros también estamos expuestos a que se nos acuse de algo que no existe, porque mucha gente ha sido capturada con acusaciones de agrupaciones ilícitas, pero ellos inventan el delito.
Esto es sumamente grave porque además de todas las vulneraciones que se cometen en el régimen por las detenciones ilegales, arbitrarias y las torturas y tratos crueles e inhumanos, también estamos viendo vulneraciones graves a la libertad de expresión, al derecho a informar, al derecho a denunciar, y obviamente también ha traído repercusiones en defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos. Tenemos el riesgo de ser criminalizados también en cualquier momento.
Vamos directamente a El Salvador, porque la Asociación de Periodistas de este país denunció la detención y encarcelamiento arbitrario del reportero Víctor Barahona, el primero en el marco del régimen de excepción. Luego de estar preso durante casi un año, fue liberado sin ninguna documentación oficial.
El contexto en El Salvador hoy por hoy es que vos podés actuar como voz crítica desde el periodismo, con la consecuencia que hay un régimen de excepción que puede activarse en contra tuya. ¿Cómo pasa esto? Desde el momento en que se levanta la garantía de un debido proceso en la detención provisional de una persona que tiene una sospecha de haber cometido un delito, todo salvadoreño que haya ejercido su libre derecho de expresión crítica a la administración de Bukele entra de manera bajo la intimidación de que hay un régimen que no le respetaría su garantía si en algún momento se le acusa de cualquier delito y que puede ser llevado a una detención indefinida sin antes pasar por un juez que determine cuál es su sentencia penal.
Durante los últimos años en El Salvador hay un acelerado deterioro al principio del derecho a la libertad de prensa y de expresión en El Salvador.
¿Cuál es, digamos, la política informativa del gobierno de Bukele en torno a la seguridad pública? Uno es no brindar información, sino que solo alguna información a cuentagotas. Dos, no permitir que sus funcionarios se sienten a platicar con cualquier periodista, sino que solo periodistas de los medios oficiales o los medios oficialistas, ¿verdad? Y tercero, pues atacar y hostigar a los periodistas que andan husmeando dentro de las cosas, llamémosle así, inconfesables que anda haciendo el gobierno en torno a la seguridad.
Y luego, para finalizar, tenemos desde el órgano judicial una Fiscalía General de la República inoperante, casos puntuales, Pegasus. Más de una veintena de periodistas fueron atacadas con este software que es financiado solo o vendido a gobiernos, y hasta la fecha la Fiscalía no ha tenido una investigación exhaustiva de quiénes han estado detrás.
Saber que Pegasus está infectando tu teléfono es que sabes que no estás seguro ni en tu propia casa, ni con tu mamá, ni con tus hijos, ni con tu pareja, porque en tu bolsillo está el intruso.
No solo fuimos nosotros como periodistas, sino que también hubo miembros de la sociedad civil que sus teléfonos estaban infectados y también los analizaron. Incluso políticos del partido oficial que ellos expresaron, sí, a mí me cayó el correo. Ellos lo hicieron como con son de burla, así como ustedes están haciendo la alarma y a mí también me cayó el correo, pero esto implicaba que también ellos podrían estar siendo víctimas del uso de esta herramienta. Entonces, aparentemente aquí se ha usado para ciertos blancos que en realidad no estarían asociados al crimen, sino son periodistas, miembros de la organización civil y políticos, tanto de oposición como del oficialismo.
A la fecha, el órgano judicial y particularmente del Ministerio Público, o sea, el Ministerio Público, la Fiscalía General de la República, no ha activado ninguna acción de seguimiento a una denuncia penal por acoso de periodistas. No porque no existan, sino porque no hay una actitud de oficio y proactiva de la Fiscalía General de la República de El Salvador para activar procedimientos penales contra periodistas y activistas sociales, ¿verdad? Esto es grave porque las denuncias están, o sea, han sido públicas. Nosotros hemos dado seguimiento a distinto tipo de acciones que intimidan a la prensa, pero simplemente tenemos una fiscalía que no opera. ¿Por qué no opera? Porque hoy por hoy el Estado salvadoreño está capturado. O sea, esa es la definición técnica y concreta de lo que pasa en El Salvador. O sea, hay una captura política del proyecto del presidente Bukele que está en función de hacer uso de las instituciones de justicia como aparatos de persecución a opositores.
Hemos regresado a prácticas muy similares a las que tuvimos en la guerra. Para quienes vivimos la guerra y para quienes no la vivieron, estamos viviendo una represión muy similar a la de los años 70 y 80 en este país. Implica que la Fuerza Armada, como lo hizo durante la dictadura de este país, ahora es el principal respaldo del presidente de la República.
Se une la impunidad del pasado con la impunidad del presente. Y lo único que se hace es justamente perpetuar ese elemento. No hay un verdadero afán de justicia, reparación para ningún tipo de víctima, ni para las víctimas del conflicto armado, ni para las víctimas de violaciones a derechos humanos actuales, ni para las víctimas de pandillas tampoco. Entonces, creo yo que es importante tener eso en cuenta, cómo el Estado sigue perpetuando esa falta de justicia, esa impunidad, y que ahora, sin falta de, o más bien con esta ausencia de garantías judiciales, solamente se viene a confirmar todos estos elementos.
Las organizaciones que trabajamos en la defensa de derechos humanos y que particularmente estamos trabajando y acompañando a las víctimas del régimen de excepción, hemos sido acusadas por el mismo presidente de la República, por el ministro de Justicia y Seguridad, el ministro de Defensa y el director de la Policía, de ser aliados o colaboradores de las pandillas y del crimen organizado.
Me sacaron un día viernes porque me hicieron un polígrafo para sacarme. Y ahí nada más, polígrafo, me pusieron unos aparatos acá, igual aquí en la silla, en los brazos. Y me dijeron que eso dependía de mi libertad. Si yo salía mal, me iba a perjudicar. Y si yo salía bien, me podían reducir el tiempo que yo estuviera en ese lugar. Y como yo lo dije todo, yo pues soy inocente. Me pusieron unas cámaras igual a grabarme. Y como a los 4 días me llegaron a decir de que yo estaba libre. Pero pasar 6 meses en sufrimiento, con maltrato, con golpes, con tortura. Comer comida arruinada. Eso es algo que ha marcado mi vida. Esos 6 meses son los peores de mi vida. Pagar algo injustamente por una detención arbitraria. Eso es injusto. Y no solo lo vivo yo, sino que muchas personas allá que están en ese lugar, que tienen hasta más tiempo y están por cumplir los 2 años. Gente que ha sufrido mucho también, no solo yo.
Mientras las condiciones en El Salvador permitan hacer periodismo y seguir alzando la voz, lo vamos a hacer porque es necesario visualizar que hay una diversidad de pensamiento en El Salvador, pero no solo eso, sino que las cosas no son tan paradisíacas como plantea la propaganda, ¿no? Entonces, cómo nosotros hacemos también nuestro trabajo desde el periodismo, desde la ética periodística, desde el rigor periodístico para evidenciar con hechos que lo dicho en propaganda y en la publicidad gubernamental no corresponde con la realidad que están viviendo muchas personas que no siempre se les escucha y que son opacadas por las grandes luces LED y los parlantes que el gobierno utiliza para promover las cosas positivas.
Lo que esperamos ahora es que ya el régimen entienda que ya basta de tantos abusos, violaciones a los derechos humanos y respeto a la vida en este país.
Sin embargo, nosotros hemos sido muy claros en esto. Este es un discurso que viene desde el mismo presidente de la República y como tal es el principal responsable, los ministros, el presidente de la Asamblea Legislativa, de esta vorágine de odio que se ha generado hacia defensores y defensoras y hacia organizaciones como Cristo Sal.
Muchas de estas entidades están tomándose mucho más poder porque hay entidades que no las están fiscalizando y porque ellos creen que tienen la verdad absoluta. Y lo más grave es que en el corto tiempo esto ha sido muy rápido y cuando la gente se llega a dar cuenta de que todo esto está mal, probablemente ya sea demasiado tarde para poder actuar.
Porque este gobierno es popular, pero además es un gobierno militarizado. Y un gobierno, además de militarizado, tiene en sus manos todas las instituciones. Yo diría que nunca en la historia de El Salvador un presidente había tenido tanto poder como el que tiene Bukele. Ni los presidentes militares tuvieron tanto poder como el que tiene Bukele.
Aquí no tenemos derechos. Aquí no hay derechos humanos. Aquí no lo hay. Que muchas puedan decir que sí, que no sé qué, pero no hay derechos humanos, porque aquí la palabra del pobre no cuenta.
Es importante saber de qué lado de la historia querés estar, ¿verdad? Si querés estar de un lado que se mantiene firme en sus principios éticos, si se mantiene firme en preservar aquello en lo que cree, si nos mantenemos desde el lado de la esperanza, ¿verdad? De que otras formas de sociedad son posibles, más luchando por la transformación social, por la justicia, por la solidaridad, o si queremos guardar silencio y hacerle lado a quienes tienen el poder y el control. O sea, el poder cambia de manos y traiciona de manera bastante rápida y aguda. Entonces creo que en ese sentido, esta esperanza de futuro que tenemos es justamente que lo que hacemos quizás no va a cambiar la historia, pero al menos contribuye a mantener viva la esperanza de transformación en una sociedad más justa y más equitativa. Creo que siguen habiendo otras formas de resistir. Creo que hay que recuperar la organización comunitaria y valorar mucho ese tejido comunitario que se sigue construyendo y que nos da también esa esperanza de continuar.
Thank you, everyone, and I think the video really exemplifies a lot of what we're going to discuss today and really give us a framework where are we standing at the moment. Again, please, the QR codes are around the building, around the room if you want to download the report. First up, we're gonna have Ana María Méndez, the Director for Central America of the Washington Office on Latin America. And with Ana María, we want to discuss how civil and political rights in the context of El Salvador, in the perspective of the closing of civic spaces. And basically, Ana María, what do you foresee will be the situation of the rule of law in El Salvador regarding this specific situation? And how do you see that the regionalization of this model could have impact on other countries in Latin America regarding the protection of human rights and of the rule of law?
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here and with Vicki and Leonor as well. I'll start to saying that as was exposed in the video, El Salvador is facing a profound deterioration of its democracy and rule of law. We all know that to counter this gang-related violence, a state of exception was approved in 2022 and has become a permanent measure that violates El Salvador's constitution and threatens human rights. But I would like to highlight something, and it's the fact that this rapid democratic backsliding is a process that didn't started with the state of exception. It actually began since Nayib Bukele took office in 2019. I will briefly mention some of the measures adopted by Bukele as an example of his concentration of power and the lack of check and balances. I believe that in addition to analyzing the security measures and policies under the state of exception, it is important to discuss further other serious human rights violations that are related to, for instance, large-scale corruption and lack of transparency that are currently taking place in El Salvador. What we just saw also is something that we have seen in other countries in the region, unfortunately. Bukele has followed what we call an authoritarian playbook that was previously implemented and, and is very sophisticated in other countries such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, for instance. But there are like key actions that that Bukele took since he took office. One is the use of excessive force. Is not something just related to the state of exception. In February 9th of 2020, Bukele commands a squad of heavily armed soldiers and police inside the Legislative Assembly to force deputies to approve a U.S. loan to fund law enforcement. So since 2020, he started to use the military as a way to control. Also, he started to control over the judiciary. We all know about what happened in May 1st of 2021, when the Legislative Assembly dismisses all members of the Constitutional Chamber and the Supreme Court of Justice and the Attorney General. So Bukele does an example in how an authoritarian regime works. Also, in September 1st of 2021, the Legislative Assembly approves a decree that removed all judges and prosecutors who were older than 60 or have more than 30 years in service. So with these measures, basically, Bukele had the power and control the judiciary in El Salvador. And then another thing that hasn't been like mentioned too much is how Bukele has been covering up corruption. When Bukele took office, they signed with the OAS an agreement to establish an international commission to address corruption. And 1 year and a half after this commission was created, on June 4th, 2021, the Attorney General Rodolfo Delgado announces the termination of the OAS agreement to support this commission. So that's another example, because with the state of exception also, the assembly passed a law that allows the government to basically do not follow all the procurement law. So there's a lot of lack of transparency in the use of public funds around the state of exception as well. And then lastly, we all know that Bukele was reelected in the recent general elections. So another thing about this authoritarian playbook is how they control also the institutions that oversee all the electoral processes. So the electoral integrity and political rights are under scrutiny. This is very problematic because you are seeing that basically these governments are dismissing and not following up all the rules that are stated in the Constitution, because according to the El Salvador's constitution, the consecutive re-election is prohibited. But it was a constitutional chamber in 2021 that emits a resolution endorsing presidential consecutive re-elections despite this constitutional ban. Also, there were like a lot of reforms prior the elections. So basically they changed all the rules before, like less than 6 months, if I'm not wrong, the elections. For instance, they reduced from 84 to 60 the number of deputies at the National Assembly. And that actually was approved without parliamentary discussions. One thing that we have noticed is that since Bukele and his political party, Nuevas Ideas, controls the legislative assembly, there are no like discussion, there are no political debate. They all just pass whatever Bukele wants. So all these drastic reforms prior the elections is just an example of how they wanted to benefit the ruling party. So that's very problematic. And then lastly, or not lastly, I just wanted to highlight something on all of this is that, just 2 minutes. I thought that I said, okay, polling as the most popular leader in Latin America, Bukele has inspired calls for the hard-handed tactics across region, tired of violence, but also losing faith in democracy. So what is happening? That Bukele, this security model is very unique. First of all, I think it was demonstrated with the U.S. Financial sanction against Osiris Luna that Bukele negotiated with gangs to reduce homicides. So there is a key element with the Bukele model is that to what extent a government can negotiate with criminal organizations in order to reduce in exchange of economic incentives. So that was happening in El Salvador. And then why shouldn't this model be replicated? We have seen that, for instance, in countries such as Ecuador and others, they are trying to replicate this model. And there are many reasons and why this model shouldn't be replicated beyond all what was described here related to human rights violations. And one is the difference that are between different criminal organizations and networks. It's not the same thing to address gangs that are basically in El Salvador, two groups of youth that don't have like enough, I wouldn't say enough of power, but you can compare these groups with transnational criminal organizations such as drug traffickers, that they have more power and they have also the capacity and the weapons that threatens citizens as well. And secondly, I think that Bukele, despite the fact that they have been saying that this is a successful model, I think it's unsustainable for many reasons, and they pass different laws with the criminal system because they basically are overwhelmed. So they pass reforms on, for instance, mass trails and things like that. So that's problematic because it is just underscore the unsustainability of these type of measures. And then lastly, this model is not addressing the root causes of violence. It poses that idea that human rights are incompatible with security measures and democracy. And I will just finish with something that Monsignor Romero said about addressing the root causes of violence. And he said, I would not tire of declaring that if we really want an effective end of to violence, we must remove the violence that lies at the root of all violence, structural violence, social injustice, exclusion of citizens from the management of the country, repression. All of this is what all this is what constitutes the primal cause from which the rest flows naturally.
Thank you so much, Ana María. I'm following on the trends, on the regional trends, and seeing that there is a spark of this rise of a hard hand, mano dura type of governments. I want to turn over to Vicki to LAWG. And basically, Vicki, I wanted to see how do you view on the challenges that the current U.S. administration has, not only with this cooperation relationship, not only with El Salvador, but with other governments in the region that are taking on these type of ideas that are basically going against rule of law, against democratic systems. And so what would you think are going to be the challenges? And in that same sense, what do you think could be the most effective foreign policy that the United States could implement in order to curtail this type of situation? Thank you so much.
You're welcome in 10 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and thank you for Danielle for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with Leo and Ana Maria as well, colleagues that I've been working with for quite some time. Again, my name is Vicki Gass. I'm the Executive Director of LAWG, Latin America Working Group. We are a small but mighty human rights organization that promotes just U.S. policies towards the region. We're about 40 years old. We don't take money from the government, and we rely on mostly individuals and organizations who support our work. So in response, before I actually answer your questions, I wanted to point out 3 or 4 things that the video wasn't able to get to probably because of times of the issue of length. And I think this first point is linked to what Ana Maria said in her quote about Monsignor Romero. There are other crimes that are occurring that aren't just the unjust criminalization of people and incarceration of people in El Salvador, but there are the crimes of hunger and greater impoverishment and extra burdens on women because the main breadwinner is unjustly incarcerated. And these are crimes that is only going to increase the poverty in El Salvador. Secondly, not only has El Salvador incarcerated 2% of its population, but it's also built the largest prison outside of the United States. And we have to remember this is a country the size of Massachusetts. It's no bigger. Third, there are mass trials, and they don't happen within 72 hours. But 6 months, a year later, faceless judges and no charges against those who have been arrested. And then last of all, we can't underestimate how that people do feel more safe as a result of this policies. But also, I've heard that people are also saying they're going to leave because there are no opportunities, because poverty is growing, because there are those fundamental structural problems of the country have not been addressed. So this is not an answer to stopping out migration. Now, regarding Danielle's question, since coming into the office, the Biden administration has implemented the U.S. strategy for addressing the root causes of migration from Central America. And this strategy has 5 pillars. 1 is addressing economic insecurity and inequality. 2, combating corruption and strengthening democratic governance. 3, promoting human rights and labor rights. I'll say that one again, promoting human rights and labor rights. 4, countering and preventing violence. And 5, combating sexual and gender-based violence. So I think it was the right idea at the beginning, but I would say that the implementation of this strategy, of these policies towards each country has not been consistent. And further, that it has been incoherent, and with, in my opinion, the only constant being safeguarding U.S. economic interests, geopolitical concerns, such as China's influence in the region, and deterring migration to the United States. Those have been the primary interests. So let me give you a few examples of that. You probably all know that the United States played a very positive role, a very strong role in recognizing then candidate Bernardo Arévalo in Guatemala. They recognized him and his upset in the first round, his victory in the second round, and worked very hard to make sure that he got to Inauguration Day on January 14th. He actually wasn't inaugurated then, but he was inaugurated in the wee hours of January 15th, and Ana María can tell you more about that because she was there. Very strong, and that those actions, I will say, took place because of organizations like WOLA, like DPLF, and like LAWG that were pushing the US to do that. Although I won't take all the credit. Yet in contrast, you look at El Salvador, and we've seen what's happening here. We've seen on this video by Amnesty International that there have been over 70,000 arbitrary arrests. There have been over 200 people who have died under suspicious circumstances with signs of torture on their bodies in these prisons. And Brian Nichols is the Assistant Secretary of State at the State Department for this hemisphere. He went down in October, first to Guatemala to provide support for Bernardo Arévalo, who was democratically elected, but then went on to El Salvador, didn't mention anything about the unconstitutionality of his reelection, said the people have to decide. We're not going to talk about the electoral reforms right now, and to talk about economic inclusion and other issues. I will remind you, if you didn't know this already, that in about 2 years earlier, Brian Nicholas, or the State Department, had said that they would not accept Bukele running again. But they soon changed their tune. So a second example is improving tax collection in the region. This is part of the root initiative strategies, root causes strategies, excuse me. So in Honduras at the beginning of 2023, the government of Xiomara Castro proposed a tax justice law, and it's actually called the tax justice law. And what this law would do is end corrupt tax incentives to both national and international companies. So it sounds great, right? Ending tax loopholes and tax evasion and erosion, combating corruption, which is part of this root causes strategy. But the U.S. ambassador came very strongly out against the law, saying that it would severely impact foreign direct investment and hurt jobs and employment. In fact, this was a call that was echoed by many in the business sector, saying that jobs would just flee Honduras. So it's important to point out that Central American countries have some of the most regressive tax systems in the hemisphere, and also some of the most corrupt tax systems. And tax collection falls largely on poor people through consumption. And so changing it is actually a priority if they want to invest in education or create jobs or fight poverty, which is again part of the strategy of the root causes strategy of this administration. Our third example is Nicaragua. You probably have heard Nicaragua is now under the dictator of Daniel Artaga and his wife, Murillo. And since 2018, they've done a crackdown and closure of civil society space. They've closed over 2,000 NGOs. They've stripped them of their legal registration. They have incarcerated political opponents, persecuted political opponents. They expelled 300 people last year and stripped them of their nationality. And they have, as I said, shuttered the 2,000 NGOs, including the Boy Scouts, just in case you were worried. So the U.S. since 2018, and this is true of the Trump administration, has imposed hundreds of sanctions and visa restrictions against officials in the Ortega government, not necessarily the people close to the family, but to people sort of outside and lesser tiers, with the intent of causing dissent and perhaps change. President Biden also issued an executive order, I believe it's 4088 in the fall of 2022, that would leave the door open to the administration imposing commercial restrictions on certain sectors in Nicaragua, unless there's a change in human rights and democratic practices. The Biden administration has not yet used this tool that it's at its disposal, in spite of the human rights violations that the OAS is calling crimes against humanity. So these are three very clear examples: Guatemala versus El Salvador, what's happening in Honduras on the tax justice law, and Nicaragua. So I'm not sure that there's it is an incoherent strategy. There's not consistency. I'm not sure there's one exact reason why. I think it has to do with competing departmental priorities, a Cold War mentality, a priority of deterring migrants, and also a new context in which, when I started this work, the U.S. would say jump, and the Central American governments would say how high, and they're not saying that now, and they're going back and forth between the U.S. and China and trying to figure out who they can get the most from, while enriching themselves at the people's expense. I do think that a constant, though, in the strategy has been the U.S., and I said this at the beginning, protecting its economic interests. So while Nicaragua, for example, has committed crimes against humanity, trade with the U.S., or the trade between the U.S. and Nicaragua has quadrupled since 2018. So trade is going very well. And I think these Central American governments have learned you don't nationalize companies, you don't confiscate property. And as long as you don't hurt the trade, you can probably get away with murder, which is actually happening. So what needs to happen? Well, I think in this short period with this administration, I think they need to support initiatives like the tax justice law in Honduras. I think they have to be more consistent on their claims to want to address root causes. I think they need to look at the commercial restrictions and other executive orders to make sure, for instance, the government of Bernardo Arevalo can actually function and not be overturned by corrupt actors in there. I think they also need to look at sanctions on corrupt private sector actors. Often it's focused on public figures rather than those wealthy elite who have power, who are keeping some of these governments in power. I think also we need to redefine, well, this is probably a longer term, but we need to redefine what it means to be a refugee. The definition that we have today was after World War II. things have changed. There are levels of persecution, but not the same as defined then. But there are climate refugees. People are leaving because sea levels are rising, droughts are occurring, extreme weather events such as Eta and Iota in the region, and that's not going to stop. So how are we going to address those people who are fleeing because they simply need to eat? And then I would say we need to prioritize human rights over economic interests. That's my personal opinion. So our role here is to keep pressing the United States on these issues. We need to provide them information on what's happening on the ground based on information we get from our partners on the ground. And we need to urge stronger actions diplomatically, as well as some of the things I've mentioned above. And I'm sorry that I went over. And I think this will all change depending on the outcomes of the elections in November. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Vicki, and I think it was very informative on how the relationship plays between the entire region and the changing policies and how also the political changes in the region has also affected the relationship with the United States. Finally, we're going to with Leonor, and thank you, Leonor, for being with us. In general terms, I just would like to ask you, how does like civil society in this type of dynamics, how does or what can actually civil society do to counter these narratives and interact in a more proactive mechanism with international oversight bodies, and in this case, especially with the Inter-American system and specifically with the OAS and the Inter-American Human Rights System?
So thank you so much for this invitation to Amnesty International USA. And it's great to be here with my colleagues, Ana María and Vicki. I'm Leonor Artaga, I'm Salvadorian myself, and I work at the Due Process of Law Foundation. Too loud. Is it loud? No, I'm good now. Okay, sorry. So as I was saying, I'm Salvadorian, and I work at the Due Process of Law Foundation, which is a human rights organization. We have our headquarters here in Washington, D.C., and we also have an office in El Salvador, and we work throughout Latin America in different human rights issues, and we do work with the OAS and the Inter-American Human Rights System on different advocacy efforts. I want to say that El Salvador, it's a country that is now on trend for different reasons. For a lot of people, it's now the country to go for on vacation, to see all the new ideas and all the changes that the President Bukele has implemented, and all this propaganda has made the country like very popular. And for other people, it's the country that all the human rights defenders are talking about, and all the international human rights body are beginning to worry about. So there are two sides of El Salvador now, and it doesn't make it any easy for international actors and also for civil society in El Salvador, how to conceal those two different El Salvadors, right? Two different realities. So on that sense, nobody really know how exactly to engage in dialogue with the El Salvador government, how to address all the situation that was very well described in the video. There's a lot of debate on what should be like the best way to work with the government, if that's possible, or to denounce what is the government doing against human rights of the population. And of course, there's not just one answer. I think that is definitely what we are seeing is a dictatorship. and this is not only my personal opinion, but also DPLF opinion. We've been very public about that, but it's not, but it's a very sophisticated one. It's a very, very well thought, sophisticated dictatorship. I mean, we're not seeing like this brutal violence as we see in Nicaragua or Venezuela. It's something that seems very subtle, and that is, while there's mass incarceration, mass arbitrary arrest, there's also like more beautiful beaches and new places for people to have fun and all that at the same time. So and that is not casual. That is part of a very well thought strategy that comes from the government. That is reality, but it also it has been built a lot through propaganda and a lot of investment in just specific narrative. So the president has created this common sense of national pride. Now it's being Salvadorian, it's a national pride. It wasn't before, now it is because of whatever Bukele is doing. And that has something that connects in a very deep way with people. And we need to take that into account when we work in all these strategies. I don't mean that there's nothing to be done. I mean that we need to take into account that the narrative of the government that the Bukele is doing what the people need, that he is satisfying people's needs is very strong, very strong. And for people that is now free of gang violence, it's a reality. So I think that we need to be also very sophisticated. I mean, we as civil society actors, very sophisticated. It poses a challenge on rethinking our own strategies and narratives, because if we say that everything that is happening in El Salvador is wrong, we're not going to go anywhere or not that far. I mean, first we need to acknowledge that some things have changed for the good of people. But at the same time, those changes could have been done respecting the rule of law and through the implementation of human rights standards. So the thing is that it's not true that you need to bring down democracy and rule of law for a big part of the population to give security for other parts. In fact, that's a false premise, and the government knows that. And there is a way to combat criminality through the institutions and through rule of law. It's just that they don't want to do it because that's not so popular, and that doesn't give them a lot of room for doing that, but also doing other things like corruption and getting control and co-opting all the institutions. So now to the point. So what the civil society could do or should do in front of the human rights systems, international human rights systems. Well, first, I think that we have like at least 3 avenues here. One is the Inter-American human rights system. As we all know, the Inter-American human rights system is comprised by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and also the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has been, I would say, very active, very worried about the situation in El Salvador, and during the last 2 years, I would say, the Inter-American Commission has used different mechanisms to express concerns about the human rights situations in El Salvador, has published at least 7 press releases, 8 thematic hearings just about the El Salvador situation, has a country report, made an official visit to the country when Bukele was beginning his mandate. And also, the Inter-American Commission has tried to engage in private dialogue with the government. So yeah, we see a human rights, an Inter-American Human Rights Commission that is making El Salvador a priority. I think that even though there's been a lot of mechanisms being used by the Inter-American Commission, there's still room for more. By more, what I mean, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights could insist on the government allowing another official country visit. I think that in 2 years or 2 years and a half, no, 3 years maybe since the last visit, there's a lot of things that are happening in El Salvador. So there's basis for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to make another official visit in a country. Also, the Inter-American Commission could at some point think if El Salvador is, it's a country where I don't know how to say it. This group of international experts could be created as the one that was created for the Ayotzinapa case or the Nicaragua situation. Also, the Inter-American Commission could provide more special measures for protection of human rights defenders. And they could also accelerate a little bit more a petition, an individual petition to be presented to the Inter-American Court. So there's still some things that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights could do. But this also means that the civil society groups should be more proactive and should litigate more and give more information before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. I know that there's a lot of efforts on the way, but I mean, it's both ways, right? The Inter-American Commission should be very active, but also the civil society groups should be like very proactive. On these 2 minutes, I want to also say that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is not like an isolated body. It also needs the support from the OES as a political body. And at this point, El Salvador doesn't seem to be, doesn't seem to be a lot of conversation around El Salvador in the OES. And the OES, I don't only mean the Secretary General, but I also mean the states, the member states. And at this point, it would be very important that other democratic Latin American states make El Salvador a priority, or at least they begin the conversation and they can set the tone for El Salvador to be one of the countries that is to be concerned about. We've seen the recent experience in Guatemala and the Guatemala crisis for the president to take office. The OES and the OES states played a key role on preserving democracy in that country. And I think that it's time for the OES also to make El Salvador their own problem and concern. And lastly, I think it might be too early to say this, but we should also begin raising the question if what we're seeing in El Salvador is not just grave human rights violations, but also crimes against humanity. And that so the conversation should shift from the in the human rights international law perspective to the criminal international law perspective. I think both ways are complementary because what we're seeing is not isolated cases. We're seeing repetition, patterns, we're seeing chain of commands. I mean, we're seeing high numbers of human rights violations. We're seeing some widespread situations. So a lot of the elements that are part of the world of crimes against humanity are present in El Salvador today. So we should raise this question and not only looking at the possibility of opening a case in the ICC, because that might seem very remotely for El Salvador, but there are other avenues for for investigating and trying crimes against humanity, for example, in third countries, or well, there are different avenues, but I think that it's time not only to discuss with the language of human rights international law, but also criminal international law. And I will leave it like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leonor, and the three of you for these very insightful presentations. To wrap up, I'm just gonna take on the main points. As to what Ana María was sharing with us, basically this is a model that does not need to be replicated internationally or regionally. It has been threatening the full guarantee of human rights, and there are various challenges for its implementation. And it's not only the civil and political rights situation, but it's also the systemic inequalities that have been impacting the guarantee of several rights. On the side of what Vicki was sharing with us, we need a more concise and cohesive policy from the US government towards the region, especially focusing on democracy and human rights guarantee as part of those conversations. And finally, as to what Leonor was addressing at this moment, is that we have to address the situation that is not a single issue, and that the Commission can do more, especially for a country visit. I think that is very important, but it means that it doesn't need to act by itself, but it also needs more engagement and activity from civil society organization. And I think it was important what you also mentioned, Leonor, to also visualize and understand that there are some things that have actually improved as living experiences for people, especially. And as well, the Commission cannot act by itself. It needs the support of the OAS as an institution. Therefore, it's important for member states of the OAS to also be part of this conversation and take on the situation in El Salvador as a serious matter for the region. And of course, then you mentioned that there could be a consideration for possible gross human rights violation, and also thinking about the possibility on crimes against humanity or any other international criminal law that can be applicable to this issue. With that, I think we can close for now. Thank you so much, the three of you, Vicki, Leonor, and Ana María, for this presentation. I think it was very insightful, very informative. I thank you a lot from Amnesty International USA. And please share this information, activate your community. If you are US citizens, contact your members of Congress and make them aware of the situation, share this information. If you're not part of Amnesty International, I encourage you to join Amnesty International, your local chapter, your GW chapter that is here. And thank you very much all for coming here. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.